Most financial crimes inside big companies are not discovered by investigators. They are discovered by accidents, a wrong number in a spreadsheet, a payment that appears twice, a transaction that no one can explain. In this story, the accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon when a 23-year-old intern opened a financial report she wasn't even supposed to check. Inside that report was a pattern of transactions that quietly added up to more than $2 million. Money that had been leaving the company for years, money that did not belong to anyone. And the person responsible for those transactions was sitting only 15 feet away from her. Her boss. Most people in that situation would do the obvious thing. They would report it. They would go to HR, the compliance department, or even the police. But Maya Chen did something very different. She closed the spreadsheet, said nothing, and continued working as if she had never seen it. Because in that moment, she realized something that changed the direction of her life. Her boss had discovered a weakness in the system, and if she understood that weakness better than he did, then the crime he started might become something far more dangerous. The real story is not about a boss stealing millions from a company. The real story is about the intern who watched it happen for 6 months, learned how the crime worked, and then decided she could do it better. But before we get to that decision, there is one question that matters more than anything else. Why would a young intern risk destroying her entire future for money that was never supposed to be hers? Part 1. The Discovery. When Maya Chen started her internship at Arden Capital Group, she believed it was the first step toward the career she had worked for during 4 years of university. Arden Capital managed investment portfolios for wealthy clients, and for someone interested in finance, it was exactly the kind of company where careers were built. The office environment was quiet and precise, filled with glass meeting rooms, financial dashboards, and employees who spent their days analyzing numbers that most people would never understand. Maya had grown up in a very different environment. Her parents ran a small grocery store that had struggled financially for most of her childhood, and she had watched them spend years working long hours just to keep the business alive. University had been expensive. Student loans followed her into adulthood. So when she received the internship offer, it felt like an opportunity she could not afford to waste. Her direct supervisor was Daniel Mercer, a senior financial manager who had worked at Arden Capital for more than a decade and had built a reputation inside the company as someone extremely reliable and organized. Daniel was the kind of manager who knew every system in the building, every internal process, and every financial report structure. For Maya, working under him felt like an opportunity to learn how the company truly operated behind the scenes. During her first week, Daniel assigned her a routine task reviewing transaction logs and verifying that financial reports matched the underlying data. It was not exciting work, but Maya approached it carefully because she wanted to prove she was capable of handling responsibility. That was when she saw the first unusual transaction. The payment itself was not large, only a little over $18,000. But the destination account did not appear anywhere else in the company's system. At first, she assumed it was a simple administrative error, but when she searched deeper into older records, she found another transaction connected to the same account, then another and another. By the end of the afternoon, she realized something impossible to ignore. The transaction stretched back nearly 3 years. Individually, they were small enough to appear ordinary, but together they formed a pattern of transfers that quietly removed more than $2 million from the company's accounts, and every single transfer had been approved by the same person, Daniel Mercer. Maya stared at the screen for several minutes before finally closing the file. In that moment, she understood she had discovered a serious crime, but she also realized something else that was much more complicated. Daniel Mercer was not careless. The way the transfers were structured suggested someone who understood the system extremely well. And that raised a dangerous thought inside her mind. If a system allowed someone to steal millions without anyone noticing, then the real weakness might not be the person committing the crime. The weakness might be the system itself. So instead of reporting what she had found, Maya decided to do something much quieter. She decided to watch, which leads to the next question. When you discover a secret like that inside a company, how long could you keep it before curiosity turns into temptation? Part 2. Understanding the crime. Over the following weeks, Maya carefully studied the financial systems Daniel used every day. She noticed that his theft relied on something surprisingly simple: trust combined with complexity. Large financial companies move enormous amounts of money between accounts constantly, and because of that scale, most employees only review summaries rather than every individual transaction. Daniel had learned to exploit that reality. He created small vendor payments that appeared legitimate inside the accounting system, then quietly redirected those payments to an external account he controlled. Later, when the monthly reports were generated, he modified the transaction notes just enough to hide the irregularities. The transfers were never large enough to trigger internal alarms, which meant the system simply accepted them as ordinary business expenses. Maya also noticed that Daniel worked late in the office frequently. At first, she assumed it was dedication to his job, but after observing him for several weeks, she realized something else. The majority of the suspicious transfers happened during those late evenings when most employees had already left. That was when Daniel felt safe making adjustments to the records. But while Maya was studying his method, Daniel slowly began trusting her more. She consistently completed her assignments accurately, asked intelligent questions about the company's financial structure, and showed a level of attention to detail that impressed him. Eventually, Daniel began giving her greater access to internal reports, so she could assist with financial audits and account reviews. What Daniel did not realize was that the person learning the most from this arrangement was not the manager teaching his intern. It was the intern studying her manager. And during those weeks, Maya began asking herself a question that slowly changed her perspective. Daniel Mercer had discovered a weakness in the system, but what if that weakness was larger than he realized? One evening, while reviewing international transaction reports, Maya noticed something that Daniel had completely overlooked. International transfers were processed through a separate system designed for large corporate payments, and those transfers were grouped together into batch reports that were significantly harder to track individually. In other words, the system Daniel was using to steal money was not the only vulnerability in the company's financial structure. There was a bigger one, and that realization forced Maya to confront a choice she had been avoiding for weeks. She could report Daniel's crime and protect the company, or she could test whether the system was truly as vulnerable as it appeared. By the time she left the office that evening, curiosity had already begun to win. So the real turning point in this story is not when Maya discovered the crime. It is the moment she began wondering what would happen if she tried it herself. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If someone proves a crime is possible, how difficult is it for the next person to justify trying it? Part 3. The first transaction. For nearly 3 months, Maya continued observing the system without interfering. During that time, she quietly opened a small offshore financial account under a shell company registration, a process that was surprisingly easy to complete online if someone understood how international banking regulations worked. She told herself it was only a precaution, a theoretical step, something she would probably never use. But late one evening in October, after the office had emptied and the quiet hum of computers filled the room, Maya opened the company's international transfer system and stared at the screen for a long time. Her mind moved through every possible consequence: losing her career, facing criminal charges, destroying the future she had spent years building. And yet the thought that kept returning was something much simpler. Daniel Mercer had already proven the system could be exploited. If she truly understood finance, shouldn't she be able to see how far that weakness extended? Finally, she created a transfer request for $12,000. The payment was routed through the international batch system and directed toward the offshore account she had prepared weeks earlier. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the confirmation message appeared. The transfer had been approved. The following morning, the company operated exactly as it always had. No alarms were triggered. No managers questioned the reports. And that silence confirmed something Maya had both hoped and feared. The system had accepted the transaction without resistance. Over the next several weeks, she repeated the process carefully, increasing the amount slowly while making sure the transfers blended naturally into the company's financial patterns. 20,000, 30,000, 50,000. Each time the money moved successfully. But by the beginning of November, something else began to change inside the office. Daniel Mercer started reviewing transaction reports more frequently than usual. He stayed later at night and seemed more distracted during meetings. Eventually, he asked Maya directly if she had noticed any irregularities while reviewing financial records. She answered calmly that everything appeared normal. The reason Daniel accepted that answer was simple. Over the previous months, Maya had built a reputation as the most reliable intern in the department. Trust had grown gradually, and Daniel believed that trust. What he did not yet realize was that someone else inside the system had begun using the same weakness he discovered years earlier, and sooner or later, he was going to notice. Which leads to the most dangerous moment in the entire story. What happens when two people inside the same company realize they are both committing the same crime? Part 4. The final move. By late November, the tension inside the office had become impossible to ignore. Daniel Mercer knew something was wrong. Several transactions in the international batch reports did not match the records he remembered authorizing. Someone else was moving money through the system. At first, he assumed it was another employee making a mistake, but the pattern of transfers looked too precise. Whoever was responsible understood the company's financial structure extremely well. That realization forced Daniel to confront a terrifying possibility. Another thief had appeared inside his system. Meanwhile, Maya had reached a conclusion of her own. If Daniel continued investigating, he might eventually discover the transaction she had created. The safest option was not simply stopping. The safest option was removing suspicion from herself permanently. So, she made one final transfer, nearly $500,000. But this time, she manipulated the transaction logs in a very specific way, so the authorization trail pointed directly toward Daniel Mercer's administrative credentials. The following week, the company's internal audit department detected the missing funds. Because the transaction records connected the transfer to Daniel's account permissions, investigators quickly focused their attention on him. His access to company systems was suspended while the audit continued. And during that investigation, older, irregular transactions began resurfacing as well. The pattern of financial fraud that Daniel had built over 3 years slowly became visible. From the company's perspective, the explanation seemed obvious. Daniel Mercer had been stealing money for years and had simply become careless. No one questioned the quiet intern who had spent 6 months assisting with financial reports. When Maya Chen left the building on the final day of her internship, no one suspected she had played any role in the investigation. But the ending of this story is not quite as clean as it first appears. Financial crimes rarely disappear forever. International transfers leave trails that investigators sometimes follow months or even years later. Somewhere in several offshore accounts, more than $900,000 now belonged to Maya. And someday those transactions might attract attention. But by then, Maya Chen would already be somewhere else, working in another company, learning another system. Because the most unsettling part of this story is not how the crime happened. The unsettling part is how easily it started. One intern, one spreadsheet, one decision to stay silent instead of speaking up. And that leaves us with the final question. Daniel Mercer started stealing first, but Maya Chen watched the crime, learned from it, and then destroyed the man who taught her how. So, in the end, who was the real criminal?